we are not talking just about human rights violations. We are talking about a system that is discriminatory against the Palestinian. As I said, it's not just one policy, it's not just one law, it's a massive amount of laws and policies that they are designed to discriminate in all areas of lives.
Welcome to Roots and Rights, a podcast from the Balasan Initiative for Human Rights that guides you through the most critical human rights issues facing Palestine today. I'm your host, Dalia Qumiseh, founder and director of Balasan. Today's episode is part 2 of a 4-part series that takes a deep dive into the Israeli ID system. Joining us today is Advocate Abir Jubran, a human rights lawyer who will help us understand the experience of Palestinians who hold a blue ID and who live in the areas of 1948 and in Jerusalem. If you missed the last episode, we recommend you go back and have a listen. Welcome, Abir, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Abir, let's talk about what is commonly known as Palestinians of the areas of 1948. Who are the Palestinians of 1948? How many live there? Where do they live exactly? Tell us more.
So the Palestinians of so-called 1948 are the Palestinians who stayed in their homeland after the Nakba and the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Some of them remained in their original villages and cities like Nazareth. Others were internally displaced like Ikrith and Bir'im and the other villages. Following this period, they became involuntarily a minority within the State of Israel, but still they are part of the broader Palestinian people living in East Jerusalem, West Bank, Gaza, and in the diaspora. The Palestinian citizens of Israel are about 2 million people. There are about 20% of the population of the State of Israel. They belong basically to 3 religions. Most of them are Muslims, some are Christians and Druze.
And what is their present-day identity card status? How does it affect their human and civil rights?
Israel has granted the Palestinian citizenship under its laws. Their status is complex because the citizenship grants you some kind of basic rights. You have access to health, access to national insurance. You do have freedom of movement, and you have the right to vote to the Israeli parliament. However, they still face significant inequalities in different areas of life. There is a lot of discrimination laws against them in regarding housing, education, language, and budgets allocated for them. So their situation is, I would say, complicated. They are citizens, but still they are lack the right of equality.
So it's very interesting what you're saying because many people might hear that Palestinians in the 1948 areas have Israeli citizenship and would assume that that means that they have equal rights to Jewish Israelis under the law. Is that a correct assumption?
Let's remember, Dalia, that the State of Israel in 1948 was established as a Jewish state from the beginning. The right of equality and freedom from discrimination is not guaranteed as a constitutional right. Although the Israeli Supreme Court in several cases that were submitted by NGOs recognized the right to equality as a basic right, and that's through the interpretation of the basic law, human rights and dignity. However, it's still not a constitutional right according to the law. In 2018, Israel enacted the Jewish Nation State Basic Law, declaring that Israel is the state of the Jewish people all over the world. And this law basically enshrines the Jewish people as the supremacy over the Palestinian people. This law didn't recognize the collective rights of the Palestinian citizens of Israel. They were not mentioned in this law. And also it ignored the democratic character of the State of Israel that we hear all the time about it. And there is actually no protection for minorities in this law. As a result, we are talking about institutionalized discrimination against the Palestinian people living in the State of Israel. And this became a framework also for the Israeli government to enact more laws discriminating the Palestinian in all aspects of life. If we are talking about language, today the Arabic language is not a formal language in the State of Israel. It has special statute, but not a formal language. Housing, preferring having homes for the Jewish people, not the Arab people. The symbols of the state, it's all about Jewish symbols. So this law basically ignores that 20% of the people living in the State of Israel.
I mean, many human rights experts have connected the Jewish nation state law to the term Judaization. This term is often used to describe the silent transfer of Palestinians in the 1948 areas. What does this term refer to, in your opinion, and what are the practices that accompany it?
Judaization, it's a term that used for decades now. It's not a term that was used only at the nation state law. It's a term used by the State of Israel and its institutions publicly to describe series of laws and policies. It's not one law, it's not one policy, it's series of laws and policies combined together in order to change the legal, physical, historical, and demographic characteristic of the area that they control and the space that they control. The broader implication of Judaization reflect on ongoing struggle over the land and identity with policies designed to reshape the demographic landscape in favor of the Jewish citizen while systematically undermining the rights of the existence of Palestinian communities. And this is not used only within the State of Israel against the Palestinian citizens. It's used also in the West Bank through settlements and through changing the demographic change that is going on there. And we can see the same policy also when we are talking about Judaization, the Galilee and the Naqab, the Negev, north and southern of Israel, to encourage Jewish people to move and live in those areas. There is a lot of policies. If we are talking about the Bedouin in the Naqab, southern Israel, there is a policy of demolishing houses, not recognizing the unrecognized historic villages that the Bedouin lived there even before 1948. And at the same time, building new settlements, new towns for the Jewish and encouraging them to move and live in those areas, even on unrecognized villages, settlements that are built on people's land and houses.
This takes us to land security. So, if Palestinians in the 1948 areas are Israeli citizens, does that mean that they have more land security? I guess you answered in part to that question. Maybe you can comment more. If
it relates also with the characteristic of the state, the policies, and how the state sees the Palestinian population that live within it. Today, 3.6% of the land in the State of Israel belong to Palestinian citizens. The rest of the land is controlled by the state, the Jewish people, basically. And also it's used in the favor of building new settlements or expanding Jewish towns within Israel. From 1948, more than 700 towns, villages, mushav, kibbutz, whatever you want to call, were built in order to give housing for Jewish citizens, while almost none was built for the Palestinian citizen of Israel. Only 7 townships were built in the Negev, in the Naqab, and that was in order to concentrate all the Bedouins living in unrecognized villages to these townships, and they are the poorer townships in the State of Israel. So there are a lot of policies also against the Palestinian citizen of Israel regarding land. Although there are 3.4% of the land is owned by Palestinian citizens, and they are 20% of the population, they don't really have full access to their lands. A lot of Palestinian villages, they don't have plans in order to expand the villages. And if they do so, There is a lot of obstacles through the way. It takes decades in order to develop a town or a village or to expand it. Also, there is the policy of land confiscation, and there is a policy of declaring that certain lands are military closed zone area or forests, or they confiscate the land because they want to build infrastructure that should always come through Arab towns and villages within the state of Israel. So it's complicated. Housing is one of the main issues that the Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel face discrimination in.
Well, that's what you described is very, very stark in terms of discrimination and policies. And we see these are embedded in laws and even quasi constitutions like the nation state law. So, Abir, I would also like to discuss in this episode the Palestinian Jerusalemite ID, what is commonly known as the Blue ID. But before that, tell me, how does the rights of Palestinians in the areas of 1948 compare to Palestinians in other ID categories?
It's very interesting issues because although Palestinians living in the state of Israel, citizens or residents of East Jerusalem or Palestinians from the West Bank, they have different status under the Israeli law. However, they face the same policies of discrimination. The difference is the legal status, but still the citizen of Israel, they have systematic discrimination in the policies and laws. When we are talking about East Jerusalem holding residency, and I guess we will talk about this later, we are talking about people who are residents under the Israeli law. However, they are protected persons under the international humanitarian law. And they also face discrimination in a lot of fields in their lives. And people who live in the West Bank, well, they are under occupation for prolonged occupation, and they have additional restrictions on their rights, their freedom of movement, access to land, and other issues.
So, if we want to talk about what we can deduce from this, is that Palestinians, wherever they are, face systematic discrimination under the Israeli population registry laws and policies. But maybe on the top of the hierarchy, if you want, Palestinians who are also citizens of Israel are on top of that hierarchy. They enjoy more rights and access, even if there is a systematic discrimination that is targeting them. I think there are 56 laws that are actively discriminating against Palestinians who are holders of Israeli citizenship. Yet, they are still in a better situation than the other types of IDs that we will be dissecting and talking about.
I think that they have different challenges. We saw that in the 7th of October 2023. We saw a lot of silencing the Palestinian citizen of Israel through a lot of practices. Even they were not able to get permissions to express their voice and their opinions about what's going on. People were fired from their work silently or not. So the challenges are different. It's true that the Palestinian citizen of Israel, they have constitutional rights under basic laws. However, in time of war, in time of emergencies, we see that the same policies that people from East Jerusalem or the Palestinian from the West Bank face, we face it, but in a different way.
So, what is for sure is that there is an active discrimination against Palestinian citizens of Israel, of the 1948 areas.
It's not just active, it's clear. If years ago they tried to say that there is no discrimination, there is basic laws and equality and so on, today it's clear that they are talking about discrimination. The aim of the State of Israel is to be for the Jewish people, and your presence in the public field is almost erased. I would say it's a struggle between identities also that Palestinian citizens of Israel face. being part of the state, at the same time being part of the Palestinian people. You integrate in the daily life in the state of Israel. At the same time, you will always be the Palestinian in the eye of the state who doesn't recognize you as an ethnic minority.
That's very obvious. Abir, let's move to the Palestinians in Jerusalem. Now, you tackled this briefly, but can you tell us more? What is the difference between Palestinians in the 1948 area and the Palestinians in Jerusalem? And why is Jerusalem often referred to as West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem?
Well, it's a very interesting issue. In 1967, Israel occupied East Jerusalem, West Bank, Gaza Strip, and Golan Heights, and Sinai, of course. East Jerusalem and its surrounding villages were annexed to West Jerusalem, and today Israel call it Jerusalem. But for us, because we consider it as occupied territory, we insist on calling it East Jerusalem. And also with all the nice claiming of the municipality of Jerusalem, trying to say that it's a united Jerusalem, the differences are obvious between West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem in terms of services, housing, roads, budgets,
You mean the
and so on.
differences as in discrimination?
Yeah, as in discrimination, I will give you the figures. In Jerusalem, they live today 951,000 people. Among them, 39% are Palestinian. The Palestinians live in East Jerusalem, and we mean by East Jerusalem is the neighborhoods. Only Palestinians live in them. And 30% of these neighborhoods are beyond the separation wall. It's the same separation wall of the West Bank that continues and also separate between Jerusalem area and Jerusalem area, between Palestinian and Palestinian, that they have the same status.
And just to clarify, Abir, as Palestinian civil society, we also refer to it annexation wall by the main objective of it, which is basically to annex Palestinian lands from the occupied territory to basically annex it to the Israeli side.
Yeah, it's a fear for the Jerusalem people that one day they will find themselves disconnected from Jerusalem, because they still have all of the services, the access, the education system in East Jerusalem, the same East Jerusalem that is separated to two parts. And also we saw that also on the 7th of October, people has to go every day through checkpoints in order to get from one Jerusalem area to other Jerusalem area. So these checkpoints were closed for months. You never know when it's going to open. You never know when it's going to be closed. You have to wait in line. And up till today, there is a lot of closing of these checkpoints. That means that you never know if you are going to work. You never know if you are going to your doctor appointment. You never know if you are going to school tomorrow. And that's the way that Israel controls the life of a Palestinian living in East Jerusalem.
So, what is the ID status of Palestinian Jerusalemites? We often hear a lot about the center of life system or requirements. What role do these requirements play in the daily life of Palestinians in Jerusalem?
When you mentioned center of life, I imagine the daily life of Jerusalem people, a Palestinian, who keep every piece of paper. If you pay electricity, you keep it. If you pay water, you keep it. If you pay for taxes for the municipality, you keep it. And they have files in their homes just to prove that they are living in Jerusalem. And why is that? Israel didn't grant them citizenship. They have a permanent residency. Permanent residency allow them to have basic access to services like health services, somehow have a kind of freedom of movement. If you have in Jerusalem or in the country, you can work, but whenever you want to have services from the Ministry of Interior or from the National Insurance, you have to prove that you are resident of East Jerusalem, and that through papers. The National Insurance can send an investigator to see if you live in Jerusalem or not. You can be questioned about your life, about your living. You will be asked for documents in order sometimes just to register your child in the population registry. The status of permanent residency, it can be revoked if you leave for 7 years the country, or if you get a new status, not necessarily citizenship in some place. From 1967 to 2022, Israel revoked over 14,808 permanent residency status from Jerusalem, and that without telling the people that they lost their residency. They will someday know that they lose it.
Wow, Abir, I mean, I have to stop at the name that's granted to this type of status. It's permanent residence, as if, Palestinians indigenous to the city of Jerusalem who have been living there generation after the other are suddenly or have suddenly become mere residents. And from what I hear, this is an inferior status. It does not confer full citizenship. Um, and then it is so fragile, it can be revoked so easily from what you say. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there are additional laws that make revoking the status of Palestinians in Jerusalem, the residency status, more easy. We know that it is easily revocable already, but there have been a few laws that passed, like the breach of allegiance law, for example. Can you tell us just a few words about this law and, how this ties into the Israeli policy of keeping the demographics in Jerusalem in check, achieving a Jewish Israeli majority in the city over a Palestinian one?
First, there is a clear policy that the number of Palestinians in Jerusalem should stay as a third of the population that lives in Jerusalem. It's true that over the years, the last few years, there was the law of breach of allegiance, and there was discussion about it in the Supreme Court, whether permanent residents should have allegiance to the state of Israel, especially when we are talking about protected or citizens under the Geneva Convention.
Should they have allegiance to their occupiers,
Occupier.
basically? Yeah.
It's complicated issue, but we saw that the state of Israel revoked residency based on suspicions and not even being condemned for, they call it terror actions, even from people that at the age of 18 and 19. So it's one of the new methods that Israel is using also against the Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem. Add to this the daily life of East Jerusalem. We are talking about more than 70% of poverty in East Jerusalem. It's one of the poorest population living comparing to citizens of the state of Israel. And they have poor services, poor infrastructure. There is hundreds of classes for schools that they are missing. And they have to pay the really high taxes of the municipality of Jerusalem. It's called Arnona, just to prove that they are living in East Jerusalem, although they might not have this kind of services from the municipality, especially if we are talking about people living beyond the separation wall. So it's complicated life that you are scared all the time to lose your Jerusalem ID. Because once you lose it, a lot of people will become stateless. They will not have any status anywhere in the world. And that's against international treaties, but this is the situation. So people fight in order to still have the connection to Jerusalem. And I have to say, people also live beyond the wall because sometimes it's cheaper to get an apartment or rent an apartment there, although the conditions to come daily to Jerusalem is going through hell every day. It's waiting for hours through the checkpoints, especially the Kalandia checkpoint, going through humiliation every day. You never know in these days whether it's going to be open, when it's going to be closed. So it's a really hard daily life that you have to face every day.
Absolutely. And to take this back to the center of life, there's this constant burden on Palestinians only in Jerusalem, that they need to prove that their center of life is Jerusalem, whereas such requirements do not apply to Jewish Israelis living inside of Jerusalem. Am I correct to say?
Yeah, and also they have a special Ministry of Interior located in Wadi Joz, that people in East Jerusalem, not necessarily the closest Ministry of Interior is in Wadi Joz.
Which
If you
is
look
in
at the
occupied
map,
East Jerusalem.
if you look at the map, for example, people living in Jabal al-Mukabbar, it's easier for them to go to the Ministry of Interior in West Jerusalem, not in East Jerusalem. It's closer. But there is one Ministry of Interior that they have a specialty in dealing with East Jerusalem Palestinians. And they do all the investigation, all the documentation. And even to get into this Ministry of Interior, it's really hard. There were petitions about the really nasty conditions. People waiting for hours to get there. They need an appointment. You never get an appointment. Everything is full. You have to wait there. And there is a lot of psychological pressure on the people that they have to wait in line just to get service from the Ministry of Interior. And sometimes it's changing addresses or registering a child or having a new ID. So it's a lot of pressure, and you have to come, everyone comes with his documentation. So your center of life, it's something that you have to prove all the time. And if we are talking the national insurance, if you are unemployed, if you don't have source of income, it's really hard to get these services without proving that you are resident of East Jerusalem. And if they have any questions about it, they can send an investigator. And if you are not at home at that day, they can ask your neighbor who maybe don't know you, and they will get to conclusions. So, as I said, it's not easy life being at the microscope all the time, investigating your life and having to have all the documents all the time with you.
And then part of the investigation process is very humiliating. Like, you have the investigators from the Jerusalem municipality, or if am I correct to say from the Jerusalem municipality, or is it the Ministry of Interior?
It's more the Ministry of Interior and National Insurance Institute.
So the reports that we receive is that their investigation goes inside the houses of Palestinians, and they open their bins to make sure that they're living in that house. You know, they open their cupboards, they open the fridge.
They check your toothbrush, if it's wet or not. It's getting even harder when we are talking about family reunification.
I was going to ask exactly about that. So, well, allow me then to ask.
Yeah.
We can't talk about the Jerusalem status without talking about family unification. I will share this personal experience. Two of my friends broke up. One of them holds a Jerusalem ID, and the other is a West Bank ID. And they broke up because they did not want to go through the hassle and burdens of the family unification process. So please, Abir, help us understand what is the family unification process and why is it a very, very big deal?
Yeah. So in 2003, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, enacted nationality and entry into Israel law. It was a temporary order. This temporary order is renewed and up till this day. Basically, the law prohibits granting not only permanent residence, also citizenship for Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza who are married to Israeli citizens or Jerusalem Palestinian that they have permanent residency. For years, Israel justified this law by saying it's for security reasons. But in 2002, the amendment actually clarified that the law is for demographic reasons. It's not just security. It's in order to maintain the Jewish majority in the state of Israel. And the government describes it as an attempt to gradually achieve the right of return for Palestinians. So that's why your friends broke up. because there is a lot of conditions in order to stay together. There is a certain age that you have to go to get into it, and you can have a military permit that you have to renew it every year or every 2 years, and that you do it in the Ministry of Interior. You will never get citizenship, you will never get permanent residency. And also it's the rights that, when you are in process of family unification, at the end you want to have a status that guarantees your stay in the state, in your house that you built. This thing you can't have when you are married to a Palestinian from the West Bank. From Gaza, there is no family unification anymore. And when you apply for this permit, for example, if you are a man, it's above 35. If you are a woman, it's above 25. You have to go through deep investigation about your relationship. And it's not just about you, it's about your family, your friends. So it's a whole process that goes deep in your life and the other people's life. And you can be banned from staying with your spouse for any security reason. And usually these materials are confidential. So there is no stability in the relationship.
It's a very chronic situation of uncertainty.
Yes.
The permanent status resident is already a very fragile one. It's an inferior one. So imagine like even having to, if you are successful, obtain merely a military permit that's renewable every year from the Israeli army.
Yes. So it's complicated situation, and some people, they choose today not to get married from their love from the West Bank because they know that there will be more pressure, especially when you have kids. And you have also to register them at the Israeli population registry. And you have to prove that you never lived in the West Bank and a center of life, and the investigation goes deeper. Usually people are accompanied by lawyers in order to get their basic right to register their children.
So the children from such marriages under a family unification process are not therefore automatically registered.
No, they are not.
Whereas the children of Jewish Israelis are automatically registered.
Yeah, not just that. The Jewish people have the right of, they call it Chok HaShvut, which means the return law. If you are Jewish anywhere in the world, you have the right to come to Israel and have citizenship immediately without proving almost anything except that you are Jewish. While the Palestinian people, their option of marriage are limited today, and their connection to the land, although they are indigenous people of this land, they have to prove their connection all the time. And if we are talking about residents of Jerusalem, they have to live all the time in Jerusalem, although they might, for historic reason, have a house also in the West Bank. And it's easier for them to live in their house in the West Bank, not in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem and the West Bank was, unfortunately, considered as one unit. But today, due to the borders, due to
the
separation wall,
divisions, the discrimination is not just stark, it's baffling. It's very well documented for, all those who claim that Israel is a democracy. One quick search, you will see all the discrimination that's laid out in laws, in systems that is deliberate and that is designed to serve an objective.
Yes, and also we are not talking just about human rights violations. We are talking about a system that is discriminatory against the Palestinian. As I said, it's not just one policy, it's not just one law, it's a massive amount of laws and policies that they are designed to discriminate in all areas of lives, the Palestinian, whether they are citizens or residents or living in the West Bank, but in different ways, because the protection that a citizen enjoys is different than permanent residents. It's different of living under occupation, which is a whole other issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Abir, thank you so much for helping us understand these policies.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to our listeners for joining. If you like this episode and want to hear more, please follow us on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. You can also listen to us and access our human rights reports on our website at balasan.org. All links are in the show notes.